being intellectually honest about what you're saying about a fighter, I believe that he's the best of this lot. Yo, this is Tribe with Yo Tribe Sports Bag. You know what it is today because you see Bias. Bias is here, and you know what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the boxing match. We're going to talk about boxing in general. But before we do any of that, let's take care of that YouTube business. And that business is take care of that subscription button. The reason why you would do that, hit subscribe, you hit the alarm button as well, because that makes sure you get every drop as I drop it every time that I drop it. So whether it is boxing like it is today, or it's another sport, because this is a sports channel, you'll get it regardless of where you are. So make sure you hit the alarm bell. Also, I am still trying to get a large sports community. That requires me to get at least my first 1,000 subscribers. I want a large sporting community so that we can interact with one another, regardless of the sport. So without further ado, you know why we're here. You see, Bias, it's all about the fight game. And that fight game has to do with Tyson Fury. He had just fought Dillian Whyte, knocked him out in a spectacular fashion. He's the best heavyweight, unequivocally, in my opinion, and in the opinion of most of this boxing era. But the question still lies. How great, how good is Tyson Fury really that good? Bias, what is your opinion on that?
Well, you know, it's tough to measure. He doesn't have the competition out there for him to truly prove how very good or how great he is. Now, what he has shown is a great will to win. Getting dropped in the first fight by Wilder, he looked like he was out, got up, and basically kicked Wilder's ass the rest of the round, and then kicked his ass for the next two fights, but getting dropped again in the third fight, and getting up and taking him out. You know, he showed a great will to win, but he has skills, but he's not aesthetically pleasing. You know, he seems to be a little bit clumsy. He's just not very smooth, you know? So if he had a dominant performance over Usyk, he would obviously have a strong argument. But right now, if we put him in the 90s, he's gonna lose. If we put him in the 80s, he's gonna lose. The 70s, of course, he's gonna lose. You know what I'm saying? So he's the best of a limited crop of boxers, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think some people share it, but there are people who believe that he is the best. In fact, I've seen some people say that he is the GOAT in some eras. The GOAT, the greatest of all time. Now, I think that's getting carried away, but at the same time, I don't want to diminish what he has done in his era, because Rocky Marciano is pretty much in the same boat. You know, he fought fighters that were over their prime and they weren't quite up to par when he had gotten to them. But guess what? He cleaned up the heavyweight division. He beat everyone in front of him, and he was able to retire undefeated. And you can't argue with that. And to give him the benefit of the doubt, he was the one who was 5'10", about 189 pounds, taking on the bigger guys, and he still ended up 49-0, retiring undefeated. And I think Tyson Fury is in the same boat, because he's fighting against a crop of guys, as you mentioned, that aren't that good, that aren't household names. I don't believe any of them are going to be Hall of Famers. If anyone is going to get the Hall of Fame, it's probably going to be him, because he's the best of the lot. And if you're that dominant during the time period, during your era, you're probably going to get the benefit of the doubt, because you've provided great fights. But great fights how? 3 Deontay Wilder fights should make him a Hall of Famer, or should it make him be among the greats of all time? I don't believe so, especially when there were so many people who were doubting and continue to doubt Deontay Wilder's skill set. Forget the punch, which is a big part of his arsenal, but the overall talent, which includes his punch, but it wasn't aesthetically pleasing as well.
Right. And if we were to do a top 10 heavyweight list, I don't even think Tyson gets any consideration. Tyson Fury. Well, I don't think Mike Tyson should get very much either. If he's in the top 10, it's definitely maybe 10, at best 9. But he may not make top 10. But getting back on track. So if you're not top 10 heavyweight, you're not an all-time great.
Of course, we know that. I think being sensible, not having any bias, regardless as if you're biased or not, regardless of all of those personal feelings or even nostalgia, being true to yourself, being intellectually honest about what you're saying about a fighter, I believe that he's the best of this lot, which happens to be a weak lot. And if you named off the fighters that are in his era, Usyk is actually in his era, but he's not one of the heavyweights that made his living as a heavyweight during his era. That's why I kind of put him out a little bit, even though he is the champion. And he hasn't fought Fury. So he just beat Anthony Joshua, which Andy Ruiz has beaten Anthony Joshua. And he's not getting to the Hall of Fame either. So there's just a bunch of, I'm not going to call them weak in terms of whether they can perform or not. I'm just saying weak in relation to other eras which were dominant. Now, I'm not even going to give them the benefit of the doubt and mention the golden age of boxing in the heavyweight division, which was the 70s. But as we're talking right now, you put him in the 90s, as you said. And I think a fighter who punches in bunches and gives him angles and gives him a lot more movement than the pedestrian fighters he's fighting right now, they give him a problem. Evander Holyfield, although smaller and shorter, gives him a problem. A prime Evander Holyfield, that is, the one that fought George Foreman, the one that fought Riddick Bowe. Riddick Bowe gives him a serious problem. Riddick Bowe knows how to throw an uppercut for a big guy, and he fights inside. He knows how to do it. And Lennox Lewis speaks for himself. He's fought in a bigger boxer in his later years and still beat Klitschko. So we know that these boxers from the 90s can do that. But Tyson Fury, I tell you another thing. I believe someone like Chris Bird would have given him a stylistic nightmare of a fight, a stylistic problem. I don't know about Chris Bird winning, but there will be a problem if he cannot figure Chris Bird out because of that southpaw stance. You know, Chris Bird used to be a middleweight, so he's pretty refined in his skill set. He could move around, and that will cause a problem. Chris Bird's biggest problem was just the overall power punches that really put him to sleep and knocked him off his game.
Right, and he didn't carry much power himself, so he had trouble keeping certain fighters off of him. But yeah, those guys you named would definitely be favorites over Tyson Fury. You know, Riddick Bowe, Lennox Lewis, Mike Tyson, probably a little too small. I think Fury probably could beat him. You know, keep him on the outside. Mike gets close, he just grabs him, holds him, hugs him, whatever you want to call it. He's gonna lean on him. He's gonna do all that stuff he does to bigger fighters. It's gonna be that much easier for him to do it to a small Mike Tyson.
You know what? I think about that as well because Tyson Fury is 6'9". He does have an 85-inch reach. Mike Tyson, he has a 72-inch reach. He's only 5'11", probably 5'11 and a half. I can see that physical mismatch. But what helped Mike most of all was that he was faster, at least in his prime, and even after Buster Douglas, he was still fast from the waist down. He was more quick than fast from the waist down. So he could change angles at an instant. And when he threw a punch, it was a hydrogen bomb regardless. So it will get your attention. I'm saying that if someone as unskilled as Deontay Wilder, as we continue to say, was able to knock him down as many times as he did, I think a Mike Tyson could do a lot of the same if that opportunity came about. But this is about saying how great or how good Tyson Fury is and looking at the fighters that he had fought, the Dillian Whyte fight that he had just yesterday. I mean, this isn't really going to change anyone's mind about this being a pedestrian era of heavyweight boxing. Dillian Whyte, he's just another lumbering guy with heavy hands, and that's it. There isn't anything special about him. He doesn't disguise what he does, and he doesn't even change game plans. Now with yesterday on the mantle, there are 3 boxers who have knocked him out, all with uppercuts. So, bro, if uppercuts are your Achilles heel, you should do something about it. Now we're talking about your latest fight. You still haven't done anything about it, and you were knocked out by an uppercut by a 6'9" guy who did not even really dip. He just threw it because you were there.
Right. I was going to say, it did not look like an over-devastating punch. You know, he didn't seem to throw it with a lot of force. It landed on the button, but the uppercut that dropped Buster Douglas in Tokyo seemed to have way more force than the one Fury landed yesterday.
Oh yeah, the one Buster landed on Mike Tyson. Of course, yeah. Buster got underneath it. Mike was already fatigued.
The one that Tyson dropped Buster.
Oh, you know what? The one that Tyson dropped him with in the 8th round. You know, Mike just has natural freakish strength anyways.
Right.
You know what I mean? And he caught Buster when Buster had a lapse in focus and caught him. You know, Buster wasn't hurt. It was a late round flash knockdown, as we eventually had saw, regardless of the so-called long count, which is not a 10-second count, but a count of 10. Bro, come on, we're not even going there. But what Fury had done to Dillian Whyte was, you know, he didn't even have to dip. He just threw the uppercut, and going by the previous 2 knockouts, you know, that's the punch you throw against him.
Right, and Whyte seems to be a sucker for it, and it landed perfectly. I just don't think it was thrown with that much force. You know, like you mentioned, he didn't wind up. It didn't look like he came from way down south. Like, woo, whoa, what an uppercut. It was just a good punch. And Whyte couldn't take it.
Well, the one thing I really saw throughout the fight is that he did try to set traps, and he did exactly that, because he would throw that feeler jab, they call it, or flicker jab, some people call it. He was putting it out there just to get a response, and he was doing it early, and he was doing it often. And I think once he realized what the response was going to be, more times than not, like a lot of smart boxers, they put it in the database, and later on they come back to it to see how you're going to still respond to it. Now that you're a little bit more fatigued mentally and physically, you're probably, you know, responding a little slower, or you're still doing the same thing but doing it slower. And then he threw the uppercut. And when you have a guy that's over 260 pounds throwing a punch at you, it doesn't have to look devastating. The one who's feeling it knows it's devastating. And I think that Dillian Whyte knows it's devastating, because on the ground, on the canvas, you know, he was looking like he was reading Braille for a little bit before it ended up, you know, the fight was over. And they did the right thing. They did stop the fight.
Right. He got up. He was wobbly. When the ref asked him to walk or come to me, he wobbled. He didn't have his legs. Yeah, the ref did the right thing. That fight needed to be stopped. But, you know, talking about Tyson, you know, you mentioned he set it up, and he did. He would throw the jab, and then he'd throw a right hand to the body. And so I think he got Whyte conditioned to, oh, here comes a body punch, or here comes an overhead right. But the uppercut came. He wasn't ready for it.
Exactly, and that's what you do in boxing. Smart boxers do it. Just boxing veterans do it. You know, the experience accounts for something. When you start, you know, seeing fight after fight after fight, when you watch video, even if you don't watch video, you know, it becomes a muscle memory thing in which you just respond immediately. You know, it reminded me of Caleb Plant when he did that smack to Canelo, and the reflex that Canelo had on that. Bro, the dude was like a cat. You know what I mean? But that's what it is. You become a creature of habit, and in your prime especially. And you know, I don't think that Fury's in his prime anymore. I think they know it's completely done. I just think that the mediocre heavyweights that are here. I mean, just look at them. Let's take a look at some of these heavyweights. You know, you have Luis Ortiz. You have Derek Chisora, who is one of these guys who kept getting opportunities when he shouldn't have gotten them. You get Dillian Whyte. You have AJ, who lost to Andy Ruiz. You know what? I've always had a place for Andy Ruiz, because he did have a legitimate amateur boxing background, which is not normal for heavyweights. Because when you're lighter, you fight more fights. You're able to refine your skills even more. So you're not like Deontay Wilder or even George Foreman going into the Olympics with 18 fights, 20 fights, you know, when the rest of the world has like 300, but you just have a special talent and a special power to win in George Foreman's case. So, you know, Andy Ruiz has refined his skill set. He just doesn't have the discipline to keep his body in shape the way it needs to be for him to be completely effective, which I can say, you know what, that might be wrong. Look at AJ, look at him, who was on the ground.
Yeah, you know, and even if I think Fury's retiring at the right time, because even if he beats Usyk, people are gonna say, "Oh, he's not a real heavyweight."
That's what it is. It's always that way.
There's always gonna be some detractors out there. So what is there for Fury to prove? You know, if he fights AJ and beats him, so what? He got beat by Usyk. He got knocked out by Ruiz. I mean, what's the big deal? He doesn't win, other than a payday. You know, they can sell out Wembley Stadium or whatever stadium out there in
over 94,000 people showed up.
Right, but other than that, what can he prove? Who's the guy out there that's gonna get him to show more than he has already shown.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, no one coming through the pipeline that I know of. I saw some fighters on the undercard. I mean, they're not really heavyweights and whatnot, but I don't know. I really don't know what's coming through the pipeline. Maybe these Cubans that are going to be able to turn pro, maybe they infuse a little bit more excitement and skill and do those things that we need to see in a special fighter. And I don't want to disrespect Fury by calling him lumbering, but anything you do at 6'9" when you're fighting someone 6'2" or 6'3" or even 6 feet, it's going to look lumbering. Your jab isn't going to look like the jab we're used to seeing. It's going to look more like a push instead of a jab. And his does look like more of a push instead of a jab. But it works for him. And against these guys, it continues to work for him.
Right. The funny thing about Fury is, although he's not aesthetically pleasing, he is athletic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's very athletic. He's actually quite nimble on his feet for being 6'9". It's just not pretty.
Exactly. You know what? When he fought Klitschko, I thought at the end of that fight that Klitschko had more to lose the fight than Fury did to win the fight. But because Fury was jumping around and still showed his enthusiasm, and he got the crowd kind of sort of into it, because I thought it was a relatively boring fight. You know, not Henry Akinwande, Lennox Lewis boring, but it was a relatively boring fight. And I still think that Fury did less to win as opposed to Klitschko not doing it enough to win. But, you know, we ended up getting what we got. And I did pick Deontay Wilder the first time he met Fury, but I picked Fury the next couple of times because Fury is a legitimate talent. There's no question about it. But the all-time great rankings, and now if he leaves now with an undefeated record, you know what an undefeated record does these days. Forget about it. You know, you can have an undefeated record and you fought your grandma and people just call you the GOAT, or someone will call you a GOAT.
For him, you know, when he had his mental issues, that still shows a lot of mental strength and discipline, because to come from 450 pounds or whatever he was to 375, I mean, that's a lot of weight to lose. And, you know, to get back in boxing shape, especially, not just losing weight, you know, he had to really be focused and disciplined. So, you know, for Fury, there's a lot of things in his favor. Unfortunately, his competition just doesn't help him.
And that's what happens. You know, you have these fighters who fight in certain eras. They have the ability to probably do something somewhere else. And it's nothing but a fantasy fight, because we won't get a chance to see them fight against the quality we believe would challenge them and maximize the skill sets they have. So with that said, and of course, we also got to look at, there are other boxing shows that we're probably going to do. This is a lot of boxing coming up. Of course, you know, the Valdez and Stevenson fight coming on. We have so many other fights coming out. Of course, Canelo's going to be picking it up soon. You know, Cinco de Mayo is coming around. And all of these things that Canelo does, boxing does as a whole. So along with Bias, I am Trav with Yo Trav Sports Bag. It's a sports show, not a boxing show, but as you see right now, we do know our boxing. So if you like this kind of content, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit the alarm bell, and make sure you comment and share this with a whole bunch of boxing heads. We know that boxing heads love watching content like this. You know why? Because they also love to hate. So I don't mind that though. Anyway,
bring it on.
He's Biased. Yo Trav Sports Bag signing out. Until next time.